Hey, today we have with us Reverend Donald Crosley, pastor of St. Mark Church here in the city of Hot Springs, who will be honored as a living legend for his community service and advocacy in Hot Springs. We are honored to have you today. Thank you for your time and being with us. Um, we know some of the valuable work that you do in the community, but some of our viewers and people that tune in may not, and they may be wondering, well, what is the Living Legend and what is it about? We try to pick people who have been instrumental in lots of ways of in engaging the community or encouraging the community or being an asset to the community. And a lot of times they get overlooked. They don't get the acknowledgement that they should. So we began this Living Legend Award is to reach out and honor them and to tell them, thank them for the invaluable work that they do in the community. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do involved with the church as well as some of your past employment there with the ACTI?
Uh, I've been in Hot Springs actually almost 50 years. I was born and raised in Benton, and a family of seven children. My mom and dad, nine, and then my uncle, my mother's youngest brother, lived with us. So we was in the house with actually 10 people. But it was interesting. Learned a lot. My dad was a hard worker. Mom was a hard worker, and we grew up. And I tell people today everything I learned about appreciation for family, appreciation for paying my bills and working. I basically learned that from my dad. He was a hard worker. He believed in paying his bills, and he believed in working. My mom was a hard worker. She was a family person as well as my dad, and I think you know I adopted a lot of those values from them. I moved to Hot Springs. Actually, I came to Hot Springs actually to go to the place where uh, I ended up working and retiring. It was called the Hot Springs Rehabilitation Center at that particular time. I came there and I thought I wanted to do air conditioning, refrigeration. I decided that wasn't really what I wanted to do, and I thought about doing woodwork. But after I got into auto collision, I felt like that was my calling to the workforce, and so uh, I learned how to do uh, auto collision there at the rehab center. At least I learned the basics of different things. And so after that, I ended up going to work. First place I went to work at that time was Allen Tillery Chevrolet. I went to work also at Carrigan Cadillac, Pontiac and Cadillac. So I worked there for a few years and then went to a guy named Buddy Cox, Buddy's Body Shop. And after that, you know, I actually kind of got out of it. I went to the gas company, stayed at the gas company a year or two. Uh, but then I came back to the body shop, and of course after that, uh, the person who taught me in the auto collision, he had gotten older and he was getting ready to retire, and he really pushed for me to go and put in an application. And I didn't do it for a while because I didn't feel like I was really uh, qualified to do so. and I told a couple of other people about it. And this was a white gentleman. He was a white Baptist preacher. And he told me, he came and told me, matter of fact, I think he came to the gas company one day and he said, if I wanted other people to have this job, I would have went to them. I told you, and I want you to get up there and put in the application.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I stayed there for 36 years. And it was really good. Really good.
Yeah. In 36 years, you had an opportunity to impact a lot of lives. Because, we look at the value of the trade, but the interpersonal experience, it carries way beyond the time or tenure that they may be there as a student. It transfers into life experiences. Have you ever had people come back and tell you?
Oh, sure. I have people. There are so many names I have forgotten. There are people who come up to me, and I can kind of remember their faces. I don't remember their names, and when they tell me their name, I just feel so outdone because it's been many years, And so I've had some good success stories. There are some people that I've really put forth a lot of effort to try to help that didn't do well. But several of those guys did real good. One of the success stories I think is that I've had several to go and start their own shop. We have one in Chicago right now, Kevin Warren, who's had his own shop for a number of years, and good friend Walter Holly, who just passed away. I had the privilege of training him, and not only training him, but doing he and his wife wedding. He was in my church for a while, and he was very successful. He went to Texas and stayed a while, come back, and he and his brother-in-law opened a business here. So I'm real proud to know that I had a hand in that.
Yeah.
He did quite well.
Yeah.
Quite well.
So that's we look at that as the work side, and it's work on the other side. But your ministry, how did that get started and come about?
Well, I guess actually since I was probably 5, 6 years old, I knew that the Lord was working with me. May sound crazy, but my brother said I would get out and preach to the chickens, preach to animals or whatever, But sometimes I'd be out mowing grass and preaching, So I knew the Lord's hand was up on me. My dad had a sister that came from St. Louis, and that was the last time she came to Benton and to visit. And when she was asked to have words, she stood up in church and she says, told her brother, my dad, so that's my brother. She said, but this is my nephew. And she says, I may never live to see it. He says, but that boy's gonna preach. And somebody's gonna say, I told you. Well, I guess I felt like, as I understood it, God had a calling on my life. But when I felt like God called me to preach, there was a little bit of fear because not only had she said she could see the day that I would be preaching, others had said that. And so when you listen to all of those things and you get thinking, man, if I go tell people that God has called me to preach, people are going to say, he's just doing that because somebody else said he was going to do it. But, when God gets ready to get your attention, he knows how to do that. And I remember one night I was awake, asleep, and the Lord awakened me in my sleep, and he just really dealt with me. And I knew he was dealing with me, and my wife actually she had she was asleep, but there was one time I asked her to go stay with her mother or grandmother. I just feel like I needed to be in the house by myself, and I think that's where the Lord really began to speak to me. And when I went to my pastor, uh, he said, I already knew it. He said, but I was not going to be the one to say it. You was going to have to say it.
Yes.
And that was kind of like a burden.
Yes, sir.
That was lifted off of me. And I had shared it with a couple other preachers here. And, they were saying, okay, so what else is new?
Yeah. Yeah.
They could see it as well.
Yeah.
So, the Lord blessed me, and I started preaching, and started preaching in the winter. It was actually February the 11th. I started preaching, and it had been snowing, and I was scheduled to preach that night, and I was so afraid I wasn't going to get to do it because it had snowed. But up in the day, it started melting away, and I was really surprised at the people who came from Benton, who came to hear me, and the person who was the moderator at that time, Reverend Amy Russell, pastored in Malvern. He's the one that actually baptized me, and I grew up under him, and it was just something exciting for my former pastor to be there.
Yes.
And to hear me.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, he said, most people start out crawling. He said, son, you got up running. I don't know what all that means, but I felt like it was a great compliment.
Amen.
Especially coming from your father in the ministry.
Yeah.
An older minister.
Yeah. We began to do a little research on you there to see what St. Mark's vision statement is. It says that to be effective bridge builders through teaching biblical principles and intercessory prayer, which lead mankind to follow after God, thus live a holy and righteous life to its fullest. Mm-hmm. Can you expound on that a little bit? So what led you to that vision statement, or what?
Well, actually, before I went to St. Mark, my first pastorage was down by Oklahoma, Birdsville, Arkansas. Reverend A.L. Nichols, who was pastor of the church where I pastor now, St. Mark, he was the one who got me an invitation to go to St. Clair, Birdsville. So I stayed there about 6 years, and I came back to Hot Springs. I never left Hot Springs, but I came back. I left St. Clair, Birdsville, and came back, and I planted the church here, the New Life Bible Fellowship Baptist Church, and I was there for about a little bit over 5 years. And in church planning, I had kind of a dual affiliation with National Baptist and Southern Baptist. So I learned a lot of things about church planning in that time, and I learned the value. I don't know if in the churches that I had been in, I don't know if I had ever seen a vision statement or a mission statement or anything like that. But I think that became very important to me. And what are we here for? Why do we exist? Why do we need another church? Why should I even think about it? I knew the Spirit of the Lord had gave me confirmation to do it, but why do you want to do it? Why? So what was the vision that God had given you? What do you feel like your mission was? So I think in those things it helped me to sit down and kind of visualize and think. And also, during that time, I had gone to a seminary extension school, Boys Bible College. And of course, you know, as you know, that was out from Southern Baptist, and they are big on teaching, you know, church planning, statement of purpose, you know, vision statements and mission and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I thought about it, I wanted to think about how am I going to be different? Or are we going to just do the same old thing that everybody else is doing? So it kind of just grew out of that as I sit back and began to really think about what I felt like God was calling me to. And so after a while, St. Mark became vacant, and they had asked me about putting in a resume, and I thought about it, and I said, nah, I won't do it. And then thought about it again. Nah, I don't really want to do it. And then there was someone who came to me and was talking to me, and then my biggest struggle was how do I lead this church that I've started? And I've told people that the Lord has given me the start of this. So if this starts, if it stops, if it dies out, you know, how do you explain that? And so being a young preacher, those are some tough decisions. And matter of fact, I went to the trustees and all and deacons and told them I really didn't want to be considered. And I thought they would just say, okay.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And so through it all, I just told them, I said, well, you have a resume, so you do what you want to do with it. If you call me, I'll respond to it. If you don't, it's fine.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how I got there. And the Lord is blessed. There was a white preacher that I talked to, and I was, you know, just kind of giving him my thoughts about this. And one of the things I said, well, I'm afraid that if I leave, New Life is going to die. And he looked at me and he says, let it die. Now that stunned me because I'd never heard that said before. Nobody had ever said that to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I don't know about that. And so he looked me straight in the eye, and I never forgot these words. He said, listen, if God started that church, there's no way it can die. God knows what he's doing. And even if a church closed down, doesn't necessarily mean it's dead. So he began to explain some things to me that no one had ever explained to me, which made good sense. So I believe that even to this day, once we emerge with St. Mark, there are still people in St. Mark who came from New Life. So in my thinking, in my belief, New Life is still alive.
Yeah, it's still alive. Yes. Yeah. You know, I guess a lot of people kind of maybe view the role of the faith base in the community different, you know, as far as being a part of it, to help to be an extension of it, or to be the base that allows the community to have this identity. What's your viewpoint on the church's role in community advocacy, community concerns?
Well, right now I'm doing a series. I actually started last week type church. Uh, should the church be involved with community? Should it be involved in government? Should it be involved in these different things? And what is our responsibility to the government? What is our responsibility to law enforcement? What is our responsibility? All of these things. Mm-hmm. And so I've gone back in scripture. And matter of fact, I went to the National Prayer Day in Little Rock at the Capitol. And I went to some of the breakout sessions. And there were some things that I learned about the Constitution that I was not really familiar with. There are some things I learned about how laws come into being, effect, and all those kind of things. And then think about our forefathers, those our church fathers, and all that. And so I'm convinced that even what's going on in the world today, I think the church plays a very, very important part. And if we don't speak up, if we don't try to set an example, if we don't try to lead the way, we're going to see much worse than what we see right now. And I'm just convinced that when I think of scriptures like Chronicles 14:7 says, 14, if my people, and it starts off by saying, my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. One of the verses we omit so many times, in there, God says this, Solomon, he says, when I send the locusts, when I send pestilence, when I send all of these things, then he goes to saying, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then will I hear from heaven. So, I know there are people who, we try to figure this thing out, but I think there are some things that God positively does, and there are some things he permissively allows. And whatever God allows, I think the church is responsible to pay attention to what's going on. And so when I look at even this virus, when I look at all of this looting and all that, the scripture said there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be. And we've seen these things before. People who are over 35, 40 years old, we've seen this kind of stuff before. And the scripture tells us in the last days there will be perplexity. There will be times of war, rumors of wars, and all these things. So I think it's a great opportunity. While we're not able to meet together in a building, God has allowed us to be creative and come up with ways to still speak the word. And so I think it's very critical for this day and time.
Yes. With that being said, can you share a little bit about kind of the movement that you're currently kind of involved in with the what's the name of the organization? I don't want to misquote it. The
Unity Coalition, it's race relation coalition thing.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's important because we know that the more we understand each other, the better we can work with each other.
Sure.
To come to a consensus of what needs to be done, because at the end of the day, they're all about youth. We have to leave a mark upon what we expect for the next generation to be able to provide based on how well we teach in our role.
Well, one of my concerns is, and I've said this to the group, Um, and I hold to this. I don't want to waste my time with us trying to answer questions nobody's asking and scratching where nobody's itching. And I don't want to waste my time with us just putting a Band-Aid on something. I think the real thing needs to be dealt with. And if it doesn't, if it's not, it's just going to be a repeat, same thing.
Right.
It's same old soup, warm over.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any particular programs that's going on within your church that's maybe geared towards youth, or voter registration drive, or anything that the community could benefit from knowing about that you have maybe going on at your church?
Well, what we've been doing, and we've been, as far as myself, and I'm not trying to reinvent a wheel or whatever, but what we're doing is we're doing throughout our district, and of course, I'm moderator of the Southwest District, which actually goes from Denton to Texarkana.
Oh wow!
And so we are doing different things. We're doing things on Zoom, Facebook, different things, and we've had, about a month ago, we've had Zoom where we've had judge, a lawyer, state trooper, policemen, different ones coming to the Zoom, coming to the table. Questions was asked, being asked by not only older people but younger people. And I think there were some important questions, some real questions. One of the things the judge says that sticks in my mind, that we need to learn, if you're going to fight with your brain. And he says, you got to learn to do it right, because a dead man can't plead his case in court.
Yeah.
So if you're killing up each other, or if you're being killed, you're not going to be able to plead your case. So we've got to use our brain, use our head, And we've had, not only that, but we've had younger people. And, we're doing stuff with opening back up the school. How does that look? What does that look like? And, as I was sitting there listening a week or so ago, and I'm thinking about someone asked the question, are children going to be able to share pencils, paper, and you think, wow, that's just a giver. They do that.
Right.
But in this day and time, that's something you really get to look at.
Yeah.
Do you allow, do you depend on the teachers to tell that? Or what if that teaching start in the home, start with the parents before they ever get to school? There are questions, when you're stopped by a police officer, what's your rights? What, for instance, if you walk up, a police officer come up to you, and they have body cams on, that red button not showing, do you have the right to ask them to turn it on? Because the truth of the matter is, you want to be sure whatever you say is documented right.
Yeah.
You don't want somebody saying you said something that you didn't say. One of the things that I think bother me a lot, there are those of us who have a license, a carrier's license. You have a pistol in your car. Well, if you get stopped, my question is, does that come up? Because they're going to call you in before they get you stopped. Well, do that show up? Well, but my question is, when we call privilege whites, whatever, You know, we get thrown out of the car, we get all this here. You're having a pistol, but the privileged whites drive around with guns in the back of their truck. I mean,
For in view, yeah.
yeah,
When
you know.
yeah.
So you have it's a lot. It's a lot going on in life. You know, someone asked a question the other day to a brother. He says, "Are you afraid of white people?" He said, "No, I'm just cautious." And you know, it's a different world. And
Yes.
there's reason to be cautious. So I think there are many things that we need to be doing and trying to teach our young people. But I do think that some of what we are trying to do, sometimes we're asking questions to those who don't even have a clue what's going on. I think sometimes we need to get some of those guys who have been in prison, that knows what prison is like, bring them to the forefront and let them, speak out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes we know because of their background, their language may not be the best, but if you try to take care of that on the front end, and they gonna be careful because many of them want to do the right thing.
Let's stop right there. So, in closing remarks, what would you like to leave with the viewers? What would you like to share as a word of encouragement to the community?
Well, I think what I would like to leave with the community is that a good friend of mine, Reverend Dwight McKissy, who pastors the Cornerstone Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, he said this. He wrote the book Beyond Roots, and he said one of the things he wanted his children to do is to learn how to fight, but learn how to fight with their mind, learn how to fight with their brain. And so I want to leave with our people. Don't be so easily influenced by everything we hear and see, because there are a lot of things out there that may be more detrimental to us than it is helpful. And I think we need to do our homework and search things out before we just jump right into it and say, okay, I'm gonna support this and support that.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. We would like to thank you today for coming in and letting us interview you, and for being a class of the 2020 living legends that have done tremendous